This is what happened in the days of Ahasuerus. The Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. At that time, King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the castle of Shushan. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all princes and his servants, the military leaders of Persia and Media, plus the nobles and officials of the provinces were present. He displayed vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty for many days, 180 days. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the garden court of the king's palace for all the people who were present in the palace at Shushan, for both the greatest to the least. There were white and blue linen curtains hung by cords of fine linen and purple on silver rings and marble columns, gold and silver couches on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, marble, mother of pearl, and minerals. Wine was served in golden goblets, each of which was different from the other, and the royal wine abundant according to the king's wealth. In keeping with the law, there were no restrictions on drinking, for the king had instructed the supervisors of his household to comply with each person's desire. In addition, Queen Vashti held a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry from the wine, he commanded Mehuman, Bezithia, Harbona, Bigatha, Bagatha, Zethar, and Carcas, the 7 eunuchs who attended Ahasuerus the king, to bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing the royal crown. He wanted to show the peoples and the officials her beauty, for she was very attractive. But when Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs, the king became furious and burned with anger. So the king consulted the wise men who discerned the times, for it was the king's practice to consult experts in matters of law and justice. Those closest to him were Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marcina, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and were the highest in the kingdom. By law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti for failing to obey the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs? Then Memucan answered in the presence of the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also the princes and peoples who are all in the province of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's conduct will go out to all the women, making their husbands contemptible in their eyes by saying, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she would not come. This very day, the noble women of Persia and Media who have heard of the matter concerning the queen will respond similarly to all the king's princes, and there will be no end to the contempt and anger. If it pleases the king, let a royal commandment go forth from him, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed, that Vashti may not come into the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal status to another who is more worthy than she. Then the king's edict, which he will enact, will be proclaimed throughout all his vast kingdom, and all the wives will give their husbands honor from the greatest to the smallest. The matter pleased the king and the princes. So the king did according to the word of Memucan. He sent letters throughout all the royal provinces, to each province in its own script, and to each people in its own language, that every man should be in charge of his own household, and speak the language of his own people. After these things, when King Ahasuerus' anger subsided, he remembered Vashti, and what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servant who attended him said, Let a search be made on the king's behalf for beautiful young virgins. Let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather together all the beautiful young virgins to the palace at Shushan, in the house of women under the supervision of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who oversees the women. Let them be given beauty treatments. Let the young women who pleases the king become queen instead of Vashti. This advice pleased the king, and he acted accordingly. There was a Jewish man in the Shushan palace, whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with captives that had been carried away with King Jeconiah of Judah, whom King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had taken away. He had raised Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The girl was attractive and had beautiful figure. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her to him as his own daughter. After the king's order and decree became known, many young women were assembled in the palace of Shushan under the supervision of Haggai. Esther was also taken into the king's household under the supervision of Haggai, guardian of the women. This young woman pleased him and found favor with him. He quickly arranged her beauty treatments and provided her special food. He also provided her with 7 specially chosen young women from the king's household. Then he moved her and her maids to the best place in the women's house. Esther had not disclosed her people or her lineage, because Mordecai had commanded her not to make them known. Every day Mordecai walked in front of the women's courtyard to find out how Esther was and what might have happened to her. When each young woman's turn came to go to King Ahasuerus at the end of 12 months, as prescribed for the women, for in this way they fulfilled their beautification, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and women's cosmetics. The young woman would go to the king in this way. Whatever she asked for was given to her to take with her from the woman's house to the king's palace. In the evening she would go, and in the morning she would return to the second women's home under the supervision of Shaashgaz, the king's eunuch, guardian of the concubines. She would not go back to the king unless the king was pleased with her and summoned her by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his daughter, to go to the king, she did not ask for anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, the guardian of the women, advised. And Esther won favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Then Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus at his royal house in the 10th month, which is the month of Tevet, in the 7th year of his reign. Now the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won his grace and favor more than all the other virgins. So he placed the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his princes and servants. He proclaimed a holiday for the provinces and distributed gifts in keeping with the king's wealth. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting in the king's gate. Esther had not yet made known her lineage or her people, just as Mordecai had told her. Esther continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told it to Queen Esther. Esther informed the king of Mordecai's name. When the matter was investigated and found to be so, they were both hanged on the gallows. It was then written in the book of Chronicles in the king's presence.